Hey guys, welcome to Living the Logic. This is Manish Narayan, and today we're going to create a .NET 8 microservice example using RabbitMQ and MassTransit. So let's go through the architecture, and then we'll get started with the app. So basically, high level, we have some sort of booking service or publisher. So that publisher is going to be in .NET 8 C#. It's going to publish an event. That event is called a FlightBookedEvent. So let's say you're booking a flight online. So basically, when the booking service finishes adding your booking, it's going to publish a flight booked event. So that message is going to go to a message broker, which is RabbitMQ, okay, and it's going to be published using a third-party library called MassTransit, which is a message bus. Okay, so think of it as a bus here that delivers people. It delivers messages to the right place. In this case, that place is RabbitMQ, which will hold on to the message until some consumer comes by. So in this case, we might have a booking consumer, okay, which is listening for any sort of event called FlightBookedEvent. So maybe in the real world, once a flight is booked, then you process a payment. So basically, we have one consumer, one publisher in this application. It's going to be written in .NET 8. So let's get started. All right, the first step is to install RabbitMQ. You can head over to rabbitmq.com/doc/download. And the latest version at the time of this recording is 4.0.5. You can go ahead and install it at any operating system. I'm using Windows, so I'll use a Windows installer. Once the Windows installer is finished, you're going to get on your computer a RabbitMQ command prompt, okay? And you should see it under RabbitMQ command prompt. There it is. Once that's open, what's going to happen is you're going to want to configure the RabbitMQ management plugin. All right, so it's going to take you to the RabbitMQ server bin. Okay, here you're going to type in a command RabbitMQ/plugins and you're going to enable the RabbitMQ management plugin. Okay, so once you hit enter there, it should install a management plugin, okay? And once the configuration is set up, you should be able to navigate to localhost 15672, okay? Now, one thing to note, before you install RabbitMQ, the Windows installer, make sure you download Erlang, okay? Erlang is required as part of RabbitMQ. So the latest version is Erlang 27.2. You can download the Windows installer. So what I suggest is install Erlang first, download the Windows installer. Once that's complete, then go ahead and install RabbitMQ. Once the RabbitMQ is complete, then you can run this command, RabbitMQ plugins, enable RabbitMQ management on your command prompt. Okay. Once you're done with the technology installation, you can go ahead and navigate to localhost port 15672. Okay, once you get there, you're going to be presented with a login screen. Okay, I'm going to log out for a second. This is going to be the default login screen. By default, the guest credentials are guest/guest. So you log in with guest and you type in guest for the password. You should be able to log in. You'll get a nice RabbitMQ dashboard, a management UI, where you can track different connections, channels, exchanges, and queues. All right, so once your RabbitMQ is installed, you're going to go ahead and head over to Microsoft Visual Studio 2022. Again, you can download Visual Studio 2022 if you haven't already, or if you're using another IDE like VS Code, that's fine. I'm going to create a new project, and I'm going to create a console app. Click on Next. And I'm going to name this console app MassTransit.RabbitMQ.console. Okay, and we'll put it under MassTransit RabbitMQ console. Okay, and I will click on Next. Again, I'm using C::development, MassTransit RabbitMQ console. Feel free to use your own location and your own project name. Okay, I'm going to click on Next here and use .NET 8 for the framework. Click on Create. All right, I'm going to go ahead and delete the default code that's in the program CS. So this is a console app under the solution. So what we're going to do is first install the dependencies that we need in order to use a Microsoft latest dependency injection, as well as the hosting services, and then finally the ability to talk to RabbitMQ using MassTransit. So I'm going to right-click Packages or Dependencies, choose Manage NuGet Packages. We're going to go to Browse. We're going to look for Microsoft.extensions.dependency injection. Okay, hit Enter there. So you're going to choose Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection, choose Install, latest version is 9.0.1, click on Apply. Okay, once that's done, you're going to add Microsoft Extensions.hosting, click on Install, Apply. Okay, and then for the MassTransit, you're going to search MassTransit. Okay, and the latest MassTransit version is 8.3.4. I'm going to click on Install, Apply, and you'll also need the MassTransit RabbitMQ package. Go ahead and install that, Apply. Okay, so now you have all the packages installed. You can actually expand your dependencies, expand packages. You have MassTransit, MassTransit RabbitMQ, Microsoft Extensions Dependency Injection, and Microsoft Extensions Hosting. Okay, so the very first thing, we're going to add a host here. So we'll say var host equals, okay, host dot. So here we're going to need a package. So using Microsoft Extensions.hosting, so we'll say dot create default builder. Okay, pass in args here. All right, now we're going to go ahead and configure services. Okay, and here we're going to pass in context and services. All right, and we'll have a pointer here. So here we can actually go ahead and close this. So we'll put an open bracket. Let's move this over. Okay, so the very first thing, we're going to create a booking service that's going to allow us to publish any sort of message to RabbitMQ using MassTransit. So the first thing we need to do is say services.addTransient, and we'll say booking service. Okay, and here we don't have a booking service yet, so we'll go ahead and add that in a new file, generate class. So we'll generate a class for now, and we'll fill in the blanks shortly. Okay. Next, we're going to configure MassTransit. So I'll just type in a comment here, configure MassTransit. Okay. So remember, for MassTransit, we're going to have a publisher and a consumer. So the very first thing to do is say services.add MassTransit. Okay. And we'll pass in a config. Okay. And then within this configuration, the first thing to do is say config.add consumer. Okay, we'll add a consumer for any sort of events. We'll call it the FlightBookedConsumer. Okay, we haven't created that yet, so we'll go ahead and add that as a new file. Okay, again, we haven't thrown in any concrete implementation yet. We're just setting up the configuration. Once we add the consumer, we're going to say config.using RabbitMQ. So that's going to be our message broker. And here, again, we're going to have a context, configuration, and we're going to have another pointer here. So we'll go ahead and open this up. I'm going to close this window for now. Okay, so now using RabbitMQ, very straightforward to configure RabbitMQ to talk to our local host, RabbitMQ. We're going to say configuration.host, and we'll pass in the address, AMQP. Okay. And then the password is, remember, guest and guest. So guest:guest at localhost. And then the port is 5672. And then we're going to have a receive endpoint for our consumer. So receive endpoint, and that's going to be the name of our queue. So we're going to pass in the name of our queue. We'll say it's a flight booked event queue. Okay, and then we'll have a configuration here for our consumer. Okay, so I'll open this up, and let me just move this over. Okay, so here we're going to say c.configure consumer, and this is going to be of type flight booked consumer. Okay, and we pass it the context. Okay, I'm going to start to add some semicolons here and close that up. Okay, so once we're done with configure services, we got to make sure that we call the .build method. So we'll say .build, and perfect. All right, so our host is ready. So what we're going to do is say await host.start async. Okay, that should start the host. And then we're going to get an instance of our booking service. Okay, we haven't written the implementation. We're going to do that in a second. We're going to say var booking service equals host.services.get required service, and we'll let Visual Studio 2022 auto complete that. And then we'll say await booking service dot book flight async. Okay, and I'll store in a console.read here. Okay, so it's complaining we haven't added the flight book consumer yet, and then the book flight async. We haven't added that method to our service yet. Okay, so now that our classes are ready, the first thing to do is we're going to create the event class. Okay, so we're going to call it the flight booked event. That's going to be a new record. So I'm going to add a new class here, and we're going to call it the flight booked event. That's the message or event that we're going to publish. So we can kind of eliminate these brackets here. And here I'm going to make this a public record. Okay, and the flight booked event is going to take, let's just say it's a GUID booking ID, and then we'll just say GUID. We'll just say string passenger name, string seat number, and then we'll say a date time booking date. Okay. And so this is a public record, all right, and this defines our event called the flight booked event. It's going to close that with a semicolon. Okay, so we have, let me zoom out a bit. So we have a flight booked event. Okay, now we can nicely publish this event to RabbitMQ using MassTransit. So inside my booking service, I'm going to create a public class, booking service. Okay, let me zoom in here. All right, I'm going to create a local variable, read only, iPublish endpoint. Okay, we'll call this a publish endpoint. This is again using MassTransit. Okay, this interface is part of the MassTransit library. I'm going to create a constructor for my booking service, so booking service, and I'm going to pass in iPublish endpoint and inject that to the local variable here. And finally, we're going to have a method async task book flight async. Okay, it's not going to expect any arguments, but here we just call the publish endpoint. So publish endpoint dot publish. Okay, and we'll pass a new flight booked event. Okay, flight booked event, and flight booked event is going to have the flight. Notice if I hover over it, it's needing the booking ID, the passenger name, seat number, and booking date. Okay, so let's just say I pass a GUID.new GUID for the booking ID. I give it the passenger name. We'll say my name here. Okay, and then we'll give it seat number, which is, let's say, 1A. And the booking date will be datetime.now or UTC now. Okay, so that's it. Our booking service now should be able to use MassTransit to publish a flight booked event. Okay, so remember that event is going to be sitting in RabbitMQ until we have some sort of listener or consumer. Okay, so we head over to our FlightBookedConsumer. Okay, we're going to create this as a public class. Okay, and FlightBookedConsumer is going to implement iConsumer of type FlightBookedEvent. Okay, and here I'm going to implement the consume method of this interface. That's part of MassTransit. Okay, so we'll say public async task and consume. So this is a consumer. We use a consume context of type FlightBookedEvent. Okay, and we'll call it context. So now I can gain access to the message. So I can say var FlightBookedEvent equals context.message. Okay, and then I can just print out to the console the FlightBookedEvent. All right, so we'll print out $ consumed message, and then we'll start to fill in some properties. We'll say FlightBookedEvent dot booking ID, FlightBookedEvent. We'll just put a comma here. FlightBookedEvent dot passenger name, FlightBookedEvent dot seat number, and finally FlightBookedEvent dot booking date. Okay, I'll close that up. Perfect. So now I'm going to zoom out a bit so you can see that. Okay. So basically, the booking service will publish a message to RabbitMQ FlightBookedEvent, and there's going to be a FlightBookedConsumer that's going to be listening to any messages in that queue. And what's the name of the queue? So if you go back to our program, we're going to call it the FlightBookedEvent queue. Okay. And again, that's running on localhost 5672. And now that we have things set up, let's go ahead and build this. All right. And I'm going to basically run the service. I'm going to debug it. So let's put a breakpoint in our book flight async method, which publishes it, and we'll put a breakpoint in our consumer. So publish and consume, publish and consume. That's the whole goal of using MassTransit service message bus and RabbitMQ message broker. Let's go ahead and run this. Okay, I'll bring over the console here. All right, it's in debug mode. Perfect. So now we hit book flight async. We're going to let it publish the message. And notice as soon as I publish the message, it will hit the consume. So it actually went through RabbitMQ. If I head over to RabbitMQ, you will see that I have a queue here. There's one unacknowledged message. Notice there's a message in there, FlightBookedEvent. Perfect. Okay. You can actually get the message. Click on Get Message. Queue is empty, so it was already picked up. Remember, our application already picked it up. Okay, so I'm going to head back in here and hit continue, and my console prints out consume message, the booking GUID, Nish Narayan, seat 1A, and when it was booked. Beautiful. So I'm able to make that round trip of publishing a message and consuming it using MassTransit and RabbitMQ. All right. So what we can do is give it a try with publishing, say, thousands of messages. All right, and I'll show you that in a second. Okay, so what we're going to do is change the book flight async for a moment. I'm going to kill the console. And just for fun, I'm going to create a for loop here. Okay, and what we'll do is basically publish thousands of messages to the queue, and we'll watch the consumer print out on the console as soon as it consumes each and every message. Okay, so I'm just going to move this stuff over here and adjust the tab here so you guys can see it clear. All right, so let's say we publish, let's say 1,000 messages. Okay, and what we're going to do is create a new GUID, and then we'll say passenger. Let's give it a name, passenger, and then we'll say passenger $, and we'll say passenger quotation mark there, and we'll say passenger. 1, 2, 3, we'll call it I, so we'll say I. Okay, and then we'll call it IA here. So we'll put a $sign, and we'll make this a variable I. Okay, so it'll be seat 1A, 2A, 3A, 4A, up to 1000A. And leave the date, the booking date, the same. Okay, so I'm going to remove the breakpoints here. I'll just go ahead and save this, head to the consumer, and we will remove this breakpoint. And I'm going to play it again, and let's see what happens to the queue and how powerful RabbitMQ is. All right, so notice it's publishing thousands of messages. All right, if I head over to RabbitMQ, if I look at the queue overview, you'll see many messages coming through. Okay, look at that, incoming 75 per second, 118 per second delivered, acknowledge 11 per second. Notice the console, boom, it's already done. I mean, imagine we published 1,000 messages to RabbitMQ and they all got consumed by the consumer and printed out all of these passengers' booking information. Okay, so again, this is extremely powerful. You can start to create services that mimic real-world events and consumers using RabbitMQ, MassTransit, and .NET 8. Well, I hope you had fun, and please subscribe, and I'll see you in the next set of videos. Hey guys, if you found the video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe for more content. See you next time.